Q&A. I have to say a lot of the questions were very similar, so I am going to actually kind of do a summary of each one of them. We'll probably do 2 or 3 because I know people have places to go. The first question is, Reverend Blackmon, many of us have had problems with relatives, fellow parishioners, and friends who are with Trump and who are critical of Black Lives Matter, who, because of Trump's advocacy for pro-life judges, feel that his advocacy trumps everything else. How can we talk to these people who we love, but whom we can hardly relate to?
So whose idea was it that I would answer all the hard questions? I offer a disclaimer. I believe that these conversations begin where all true conversation begins, and that is in a mutual love and respect for one another. We are not strangers to difficult conversations in our families. Most of us have that uncle or that aunt, or sometimes even a parent. And so I've had conversations, even in my family, not so much about Trump, we're pretty solidified there, but certainly about Black Lives Matter. And I want to just ask in this room, does anyone know how Black Lives Matter got started? Just a couple of hands. If you would indulge me for just a moment, I think it would be helpful in your conversations. For there is a West African proverb that says, until the lion tells its own story, the hunter is always the hero. Black Lives Matter began because of the reaction of young people to the killing of Trayvon Martin in Florida. When Trayvon Martin was killed by a wannabe neighborhood protector, carrying some Arizona tea and some Skittles, when the police recordings of that person calling in to say that he suspected suspicious activity also recorded the advisement that he not pursue this person. When the recording also included parts of the struggle that he had with an unarmed child, there was an outcry in the Black community because this behavior was not foreign to the Black community. A part of that outcry happened on social media because that's what younger people do, is social media. And one of the things that happened in social media was a young woman by the name of Alicia Garza, who was already an activist, already an organizer in the Bay Area, wrote an open letter about her pain and her hurt about another Black child being gunned down this way. At the end of that open letter, she made the comment, Black Lives Matter. She made the comment as a Black woman who was saying that so often in this society, it seems like Black life was not as valuable as white life. People who read her open letter, one of them being Patrice Colliers, someone she did not have a relationship with, but was also in the organizing group, did what young people do now and say, Black Lives Matter, that resonates with me, we should hashtag that. Hashtag begins trending something for those of you who do social media. That trending brought in also Opal Tomietti into the conversation. And the three of them began having conversations about what it means for Black Lives Matter to be trending with so many people on social media. I say that to you because Black Lives Matter is an ethos that people who walk with black and brown skin covering their spirit understand that there are ways that we are systemically treated in this country that are different from the ways that people with white skin are treated systemically. That does not mean that white people don't have issues. It doesn't mean that there aren't white people who are victims. I'm talking about the collective narrative. That is the ethos. Black Lives Matter as a hashtag became a mantra that young people began to sign on to say, yes, I affirm what you are feeling in this moment. And later, it became an organization. This is an important narrative because the response to saying Black Lives Matter became later Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. And it became then situated as something to fight against rather than something to embrace as a way to say all of God's children deserve to be treated right. That is the ethos of Black Lives Matter. When Michael Brown was killed, people who had been connecting with one another over social media decided this is a time when we can act with our feet. And Patrice, Opal, and Alicia began to organize buses in the spirit of the old freedom rides that integrated the South to come to Ferguson for what became known as Ferguson October. When they were on their way, a college had agreed to host them because once they opened it up, over 800 young people signed on for these bus rides from all over the nation. And they were to stay in the dorms of a local college. When the college realized how many people were coming, they called and said, we changed our minds. The problem with that is that they were already on the road. And so they made a call to a colleague of mine, Reverend Traci Wilson, who is a UCC pastor in St. Louis, and asked could he find somewhere for them to stay. He opened the basement of the church. And for the entire weekend, these young people, many who had sworn off church, let me make a distinction. They had not sworn off God. They swore off us. It's a big difference. They had become disenfranchised in the institutional church, but they had faith. And they came into the basement of the church and began to strategize what is now become an organization. What I would say, and this only works for Christian households, you have to translate it. What I would say is, on Calvary, when Jesus was crucified with a sign overhead that said, King of the Jews, it's the same kind of moniker to say Black Lives Matter. Not to say, not to denigrate or to be disrespectful of Jesus, that's not what I'm saying. But Jesus came in a particular way to identify with the marginalized, to identify with the oppressed. And the hashtag Black Lives Matter is for the same reason. It is not anti-anybody. It is pro-everybody. But this nation is so centered in whiteness, so centered in white supremacy. And I don't mean that to say that being white is a bad thing. It's not. I'm not even talking about white skin. I'm talking about white power, white supremacy. This nation is so rooted in white supremacy that the idea that someone who is non-white would dare say, our life matters, has caused reactions that are not the same as the intent of the statement. Now, you can't say that at your dinner table. in your circle of friends unless you have built relationship. So what I would say about talking to those who have voted differently than us, those who have embraced a different understanding of the statement Black Lives Matter, of the mantra Black Lives Matter, of the organization Black Lives Matter, which has moved into the political realm now, I would say that you have these conversations with love. You have these conversations recognizing that even as you are speaking, there are places of privilege within yourself that you have not yet dealt with. For me, the humbling of that is that I make an intentional decision every day to not consciously walk in places of saying, because I'm a black woman, because I'm a black woman, double whammy, that I'm going to live solely in my place of marginalization and not look at the places where I am privileged in this world. I am privileged as a Christian in the United States of America. The whole country bows to my religious calendar. The entire country acknowledges my way of thinking about God and God talk. It is a privilege to be a Christian in the United States, and is often overlooked because it is the water in which we swim, right? I walk in privilege as a straight woman in the United States. It is a privilege that no one ever questions me about my gender, my presentation. The assumption is that I have a husband somewhere. I don't, by the way. And I'm not looking. No hate to those who do. But there are assumptions that are made because the society has been groomed for my arrival in those ways. The same is true of whiteness. We live in a country that has been groomed for whiteness. And that is not by accident. Newsflash, race is not a real thing. Race is neither biological nor anthropological. Race is a social construct created solely for the purpose of creating a white-owning class.
Right.
White is not a thing. Everybody comes from somewhere.
Right.
And race is nowhere in any sacred text. So the way we have these conversations is to have them from a place of love and a place of grace. May I go a little further? I'm just going to push a little further. One of the issues that we face, even in those of us who are committed to this work, is multi-issues we face, but the one I want to talk about right now is white guilt. And I want to talk about it because we're in a predominantly white room. And white guilt is killing us. White guilt keeps us from doing the deep work. Because the one thing every white progressive fears is being called a racist. Because that's not who you are. That's not how you see yourself. And we have become so toxic in our society that if someone says the wrong thing, does the wrong thing, makes the wrong gesture, even if they're trying to do the best they can, even if they haven't learned all the ways for racism not to show up in their lives, people do not say what they could say because they're afraid if they say the wrong thing, then they'll be called a racist. Am I wrong about that?
No.
So, what we need is space for grace. And every time I hold conversations about race, about sexism, about heterosexism, about xenophobia, we're the UCC, we have conversations about all of it. Every time I hold the conversations, I begin by declaring the room to be sacred. And I begin by saying that I am making an intentional decision to believe that everybody who shows up for this work wants to do the work. And that at their core, they want to make a difference. So whatever comes out of your mouth, I'm going to assume that it is not your intent to hurt me. And I ask that you have the same grace for me. Why is it in the church, those of us who preach and proclaim grace so much have so little for one another?
That's good. That's right. That's good.
That's what it takes. So I wrote a piece because I have lots of white colleagues that do this work with me. And it's called white privilege, because I find that for many, even the term white privilege triggers. It says, sorry, my finger blew it up. When I call out your white privilege, I am not dismissing your presence in this struggle, nor am I questioning your sincerity. When I call out your white privilege, I am not accusing you of the evil, nor am I separating you from its effects. When I call out your white privilege, I am not shrouding you in its shame, nor am I excusing you from its responsibility or accountability. When I call out your white privilege, I am naming the target that is on your back. I am acknowledging the ill effect of racism on your being. I am joining you to the struggle in the only way that leads to liberation. When I call out your white privilege, I am acknowledging this privilege as being as unearned, unwarranted, and incapacitating as the racist systems and structures that collude to oppress people of color all over this world. When I call out your white privilege, I sound the alarm of the danger that lurks in not being fully aware of the toxic waters in which we swim. Waters that make you feel as though you are breathing, so you never come up for air. When I call out your white privilege, it is not because I believe you can remove it alone, nor because I believe you can choose to use it or refuse it. If these things were true, it would be privilege indeed, but it is not. It is a tool of the enemy designed to create an illusion of God divided against God's self, crafted so that some might assume the idolatrous position of believing somehow that anyone created in the image of God could ever be inherently flawed. When I call it out, white privilege, it is not because I hate you. It is not to separate you. It is to remind you and myself that we are one.
So in wrapping up, I'm going to ask Reverend Blackmon to offer a few words of encouragement as we go out into the field, into our mission field, and then we will have a closing prayer from Reverend Betsy Aldrich Garland.
I don't know that I need to offer words of encouragement. You're a pretty motivated group. I just want to perhaps give you a warning that this work cannot be sustained without joy. that this work cannot be sustained without rest, that this work cannot be sustained without replenishing one's spirit continuously, and that sustenance does not come from anger, it does not come from rage, it does not come from an antagonistic position against those with whom you disagree, but it must come from the places that give you life. So every once in a while, turn off social media. Every once in a while, skip the news. It's like the soap operas. They will still be in trouble when you get back. Every once in a while, sit down with your friends and family and declare it a no-issue zone. And give yourself some space for joy. What brings you joy? Because that is what the good news is. It is joy. We have been in these cycles before. We will survive. There will be a new king. And we will still have issues no matter who that king is. So we're marathon runners. We're not sprinters. And there are many of us. Turn around and look at who is in the room. And know that earlier this morning, the room was filled even more than this. And everyone who is doing this work is not in this room, is not in Rhode Island, is not even in the United States. All working towards justice. The work will not fall apart if you rest. The work will not fall apart if you miss the email today. The work will not fall apart if you don't forget that you're raising children, that you're in relationships, that you have to have a life that brings you joy. It's only with joy that you can run this race.
Amen. Yeah.